Okay, fantastic. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for coming. Welcome, dear guests, colleagues, esteemed panelists. Channel 2, bump up the volume. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. One second. Yeah, good? Great. Okay. Yeah, so welcome again. Thank you so much. We know it's the last day of the 2024 Internet Governance Forum, and we're really grateful that you chose to spend it here with us. My name is Judith Espinoza. I'm a governance specialist at the World Economic Forum, working on emerging tech and frontier tech and the future internet. And really today what we're going to do is focus on some of that remit of the work that we do at the forum, couched in two initiatives, one the Connected Future initiative and another on the body of digital trust. So I'm really grateful. I'm joined here by some wonderful and esteemed panelists that have been a long time partners of the forum. And I'll go ahead and introduce you to them right now. So to my left, I have Dr. Hoda Al-Kazemi, who's the Associate Vice Provost of Research, Transition, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship at NYU Abu Dhabi. She is also the co-founder and I think now Director Emeritus of the Center for Cybersecurity. To her right, we have Britton Heller, who also a longtime friend of the forum. She's a Senior Fellow of Technology and Democracy at the Atlantic Council, as well as a professor at Stanford Law School. Welcome. To her right, we have Robin Green, the Director of Privacy and Public Policy at Meta. And last but certainly not least, Apostolos Papadopoulos, who's the CTO and Digital Transformation Advisor of Greece. So with that, I can go ahead and get started and give some context. So a lot of the work that we do at the forum initially started as part of the Defining and Building the Metaverse initiative, of which every single person on this panel, which I'm grateful to have, was part of that work. And what we were working on is building an open, interoperable, trustworthy, safe internet, really. And through that work, we realized that the metaverse is not really like an endpoint, right? It's not the destination. Rather, it's a sort of conglomerate of emerging technologies, whether they be XR, AR, VR, supported, of course, by AI and spatial computing, that are integrating into future internet experiences. And that's what we want to focus on now, right? How do we use these things to get to a better future internet? What is the future internet, and how are we getting there? If anything, we've heard in the last couple of days at the IGF, we know that the internet is it's sort of an evolving concept, right? When it began, it certainly wasn't this. And I'm going to start that with the next question for Robin. You know, Meta is a huge player in the internet space, and when Meta started first, obviously it was Facebook. You disrupted the internet. You redefined what it meant to be connected. So I want to ask you, what does Meta think the future of the internet looks like? What kind of products does it feel is going to integrate into the future internet? How do you think about that from a user perspective?
Thanks, and I'm so glad to be here. Thank you all. I think we're just super excited about the future of the internet. You can probably tell from the level of energy that we're bringing to our product releases and the speed of development that we're pursuing. I think we really see the metaverse as the next evolution in social networking. In many ways, it's going to be the successor to today's internet ecosystem. It's going to, offer immersive worlds using multiple senses, body language, and spatial awareness. And so, like, really bringing digital technology to life for people in a new and profound way. In many ways, I like to think of it as today's experience on the internet, for the most part, is sort of at arm's length. It's as a spectator, is because you're going to websites, you're reading them, it's 2D, it's interactive in some ways, but it's not immersive. And so now, when you think about what the metaverse is going to look like, it's really going to transform the way that we connect with people, because it's going to have that immersive quality, and it's going to really allow you to have shared experiences as opposed to just shared spectation. And so, sort of thinking about the difference of having a phone call or a text message chat or a WhatsApp chat better, with someone versus having the ability to have a shared experience with someone who's across the country or across the world. I think about the potential that this has for me to be able to see concerts or basketball games with my sister, who I live in DC and she lives in California, thousands of miles away. The future of the internet is truly going to be bringing people closer together in a more intimate way. It's really something that's going to be enhancing experiences, though. It's not going to be replacing social connection. And that's really important because I think, one of the things that people get concerned about is that, it could create parasocial relationships in ways that just don't reflect the closeness that we want to have today. the metaverse is really going to drive increased connectedness and shared experience, but it's not going to be replacing the drive to have that in-person connection. In addition to that, I think one of the things that we think is going to be most relevant, right, with the future of the internet and the role that the metaverse is going to play in that is how it's really going to impact the economy and the way that we work, the way that we learn. You can already see these kinds of advances in education, in economic development, and even in workforce training. And so that's really exciting to see the different types of things that bringing people closer together is going to allow once you add that immersive component. I think one of the other things that we are really thinking about, and this sort of speaks more to the second part of your question of what does the future of the internet look like? We're very committed to the idea of having the open, interoperable internet. But this also means collaborative development, right? This means that we want and we think for the metaverse to really grow and reach its maximum potential, we need to be working closely not only with companies of all sizes, but also with developers, with creators, and with users to make sure that we are building the kinds of innovative technologies and experiences that people want and need. Um, there's two more things that I'd flag. A lot of times folks think of like the versus one thing and then AI is another thing, but one of the things that's becoming increasingly clear, I think, in the development space, is that AI has always been critical to the metaverse and to Meta's vision of the metaverse in particular. You can see that reflected in Quest 3. We have end-to-end AI modeling for sensing depth and space, and like creating immersive 3D imaging, and like recreate objects in AR and VR. And then I think LLMs are another great example of where AI is essential to the development and growing adoption of the metaverse. Where you're going to have things like virtual assistants that are extremely powerful. We're going to be using smart glasses that combine. I mean, we are today, with Meta Ray-Bans that combine mics, cameras, speakers, and that they're going to be able to understand the world around you and provide that kind of supercharged virtual assistance hands-free. And that can be really world-changing. But in order to make all this happen, it's going to be really essential to have the global infrastructure that supports it. Data centers are a great example of some of the kinds of infrastructure that we're going to need. But in order to really be able to grow that, I'm so sorry. I think some people online couldn't hear me. In order to grow that infrastructure, it's going to be really important that we have a regulatory and legal environment that supports it. This means having globally predictable, interoperable, and adaptable regulations that promote digital connectivity and really bridge the digital divide, and that promote data flows and secure communications like encryption of data in transit.
I really appreciate what you said about AI always being part of these technologies, right? I think it's easy for perhaps from a consumer perspective to look at things as silo developments, but as we move into the next phase of internet, right, we can see that none of this is developed on its own. These are things that have to go together. AI is enabler for lots of these technologies, right? But it's not a product on its own. So I think this is perfect. And with that, I also want to share part of the way that at the forum we're envisioning the future of the internet, right, is that these are digital intermediaries for connection, right? Whether it be through social media, whether it be to commerce, whether it be to health, agentic AI, you name it, right? And one of those ways, one of those pathways forward is through digital public infrastructure. So the way that people can connect to each other, also economic opportunity, growth. And with that, I want to turn to Apostolos, and I want to ask you how has Greece advanced the next iteration of the internet experience through digital public infrastructure? How are you developing DPI in Greece? And what are some of the maybe the governance opportunities that presents, right? DPI as an enable of good governance, as a means of connection.
Okay. Uh, Thank you very much for your question and excited to be here. So from in the Greek context, I think the, um, the digital transformation journey of the country is in two stages, in two phases. We're currently in a stage where we are doing a lot more work in AI and working with emerging technologies. And you're talking about experiences, and I think the permeating um, word that would delineate this would be trust and directness and and transparency. So citizens would like to interact with governments and to have a direct and easy way to do that, and a way to do that in an easy way. So currently, we're doing a lot of work in AI. We are doing work in LLMs. So we created a government chatbot so citizens can interact with the government portal and figure out easy ways to interact with every service and have access to digital services. We're doing work in AI in education with digital tutoring and homework assignments. So in this phase, we're investing a lot in new and emerging digital public infrastructure, emerging technologies. The first phase that allow us to do that starts in 2019 with the creation of a digital ministry, digital transformation ministry, and that was phenomenal because up to that point, something like that did not exist in Greece, and that created the base work, the baseline for the second phase to be able to be executed. So this from 2019 to 2023, there's been a digital tiger leap, as people have called it, in the sense that digital adoption was very low in Greece. 2018, we had 8 point something million digital transactions in total. Greece is a country of about 10 million people, so it's a very low number of adoption. But 2023 ended with 1.4 billion. So if you chart that, it's exponential growth, both in terms of supply as well as demand. So this first stage, created the regulatory framework, the engineering framework, the platforms, for us to be able to go in the second phase and do more work with emerging technologies. And the regulatory framework, speaking of that, is a crucial layer of this stack. You have to have common sense, light touch approaches, regulation. Uh, People can innovate both internal, in-house, inside the government, as well as external partners. And overall, I would say PI in Greek currently is very much a given, and digital is considered something that is, by default. So this is what people and businesses expect of the government.
Thank you so much. I want to follow up with one more question for you. You're talking about like exponential growth in usership and in following this model. Do you think you see this as an essential way, I guess, for also for financial growth for the country, right? You're connecting. It's peer to peer. It's also services to peer, and also I guess for businesses as well. How do you see this growth?
Yes. Um, Very positively. One of the deliverables of this approach has been 2.5 US dollar, billion dollars in investment in FDI. We have we are the Greece is the only European member state, the only European Union member state, along with Poland, that are major high risk country. And so, okay, can you hear me better now? Perfect. Okay, great. All right, thank you. Sorry. Um, so FDI is a crucial part of this equation. Can you hear me better? Yes, that is fantastic. Okay, so we had a microphone problem. So I was just saying, FDI is crucial and it is a direct byproduct of the strategy and of the execution of the strategy. So the Greek government has been working with international and local partners, and there has been a great synergy between all the stakeholders, and both in terms of job growth as well as in terms of investments has been a very positive story so far.
Thank you so much. I with that, there's an interesting narrative that we're starting to weave here, right? Which is investment, and that leads to growth, and that leads to opportunity, and that builds good governance, right? This is an opportunity to build better governance, to build better trust among stakeholders, and with that, I really want to pivot now to Britain. We're talking about the internet evolving, and as these technologies evolve, I wonder, what do you think are the core regulatory and policy obstacles that we must overcome to really make a better internet, right? What have we done wrong? Where can we do things better? And are there really any new risks that you think regulators should be paying attention to?
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Great. So I teach international law and AI regulation and have worked in emerging technologies for about 8 years now. So I'm going to give you the conclusion first. The conclusion is that emerging technologies are a constellation. And if your regulatory approach focuses on one aspect in lieu of the others, you're going to miss the bigger picture. So you have to think about the way that AI will be interacting with immersive technologies. We'll look at new payment systems like blockchain. We'll look at the new petrol of the internet, quantum computing, and seeing how all of those systems will feed off each other, will interact with each other, and how existing law may not be a clean fit for these new technologies. There are four things that I think can be valuable when you're trying to figure out this puzzle about if your existing law will fit and how to determine what needs to be addressed first in a regulatory regime. The first obstacle is ensuring that these regimes, which were designed primarily in the late 1990s and early 2000s, are adaptable enough to keep pace with the rapid evolution of these technologies. One example that I work a lot on are virtual reality or XR systems. We put on a conference at Stanford Law School last year called Existing Law and Extended Reality, because you can't just take laws formulated for 2D computing, put them into 3D spaces, and expect that they're going to work the same way. The way that you formulate jurisdiction, the way that privacy concerns operate in a technology that is different from your laptop because it has sensors that must reach out into the environment to calibrate your device. Your privacy looks different when it's not just based on the words that are going in and out of servers, when it's actually location based and based on your biometric data. So looking at that, how adaptable is your legal system? Second is the question of cross-border regulation. And I know I sound like I'm coming straight at you from 2006, but it's a very important issue. And um, when you look at all of this, look at it with all puns intended as a second bite at the apple. All of the things that you wish could be different about the way internet governance works and manifests in your jurisdiction, in your company, in your stakeholder group, you have a chance to do it differently this time. Take that opportunity. So looking at the way that data protection laws align with regulations in other parts of the world so we don't create another fragmentary regulatory landscape. And how do you create the coordination necessary to make this work across different countries? Third is a question of accountability and transparency. As we rely more on automated systems, the question of who is responsible when something inevitably goes wrong becomes much more complicated. So when I evaluate AI regulatory regimes, it's not just the robustness or strength of the laws that I look at, it's the actual enforceability of those regulations. And the way that laws that are cut and pasted from one country and placed into another legal context may not have the same impact on the ground and in the business sector based on the way your corporate laws are structured. So you can't expect the same results by cutting and pasting. Um, and finally, in terms of new risks, One of the most pressing concerns is the potential for increased surveillance and erosion of privacy. Um, as these technologies are evolving, you see they enable more granular tracking and profiling of individuals, oftentimes without knowledge or consent. And in new technologies where AI grows legs and walks out in the world amongst us, you you need this type of information to calibrate the device. So your conception of privacy, of consent, of freedom of information, all of these things need to shift in the type of understanding that you see embedded in earlier generations of laws. Overall, regulators need to think about these risks on a broad scale, focusing on fundamental rights while fostering innovation. And the nice thing about these new ecosystems is that what is good for users is also good for human rights. So they don't have to develop at odds with each other when you're starting to create these systems anew. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think this is a perfect segue to you, Dr. Hoda. We've heard now what those policy gaps are. I wonder, this is governance and policy, right? But from your perspective, you've advised multiple industries, multiple companies. What do you think the most important ethical considerations are for the private sector when developing these technologies? How do you think that this can be built in a trustworthy way? And then also, we always talk about trust at the forum, right? We want to talk about how you build trust with users, with society writ large. But what are the metrics then to know that something is trustworthy, right? We can all say that something is trustworthy, but how can we prove that there is trust there, right? Whether it's at the government level, whether it's at the product level.
I think one of the most important aspects that faces the private sector is how can you bring the ethical stack into the trust component, into the functionality of the final product that you're putting onto the market. We have talked about several trust frameworks that exist internationally with the OECD, with the UN, and as well with the World Economic Forum and TASI, which is mostly that's addressable to accountability, transparency, security, inclusivity, and interoperability. But when you look at the technology that's being produced in the market today, you don't see that kind of holistic deployment of ethical components across map in the technology stack. So how can we encourage that at the algorithmic level is very important. And I think right now in 2024, when we are trying to publish in my research group in any kind of AI top tier conferences, what I see very positive is the fact that they kind of encourage you to make sure that your algorithm is accessible and the transparency is available in the system. And that's quite important because then you start changing the system and you don't get access to publication unless you do that. And I would like to see these kind of nudges as well existing on the platform level. Because when we talk about the current social media platform, for example, we don't see the same level of transparency. I mean, like, I'm not talking about annual reporting or reporting that exists at specific periodic level, but that kind of dynamic, quick, at the tip of your finger level of ethical transparency that exists that would tell you who used your data, for what purpose you used your data, that kind of end user dashboard platform that should exist for user. And I think in the research space, we do a lot to improve security. We do a lot to make sure that we have, privacy aspects, zero trust systems, homomorphic encryption, federated learning. These big tools that takes us sometimes years to develop in order to bring trustworthiness and level of reliability and security into the technology, but not necessarily always we see them used or transformed into the product cycle. So that's kind of concerning on the map, on the holistic map. And I think the 2000, this area of 2025 to 2030 would be the period where we perfect this kind of transitioning of ethical components into technology. That's the first hit, I think, or challenge that we see across the map. And the second challenge is for us to understand that bringing ethical and trustworthy digital solutions into the platform is a multi-stack layer kind of challenge. So you're not dealing only with the technology or with the ethical stack, but also dealing with the regulation aspects, with the harmonization efforts that exist across the globe. You're dealing with how we should write those into policies, into um, as well regulations that would bring data acts into action in different jurisdictions, respecting the indigenous differences of those jurisdictions is very important, because for as Britain just said, it's quite different to bring activation of laws when you're dealing with it in specific jurisdiction versus another. And we should respect that, and we should allow those kind of legal sovereignty rights of developing the law when it comes to technology to exist across different markets. So this is the second, I think, challenge that I see existing, and it worries me at the moment that everybody is looking at the EU, for example, AI Act as the grand flagship regulation to be used across jurisdiction, which is not going to be the same, because it's risk oriented kind of framework of legislation that might not work for Asian countries, for example, where they are much more concerned about the value principle based kind of approach, and they want that to be as well translated into the platform. So interpretation of ethics and legislation into the platform is very important. And your second question is, what do we have to include when we are talking about the trust stack across board? I mean, if you ask a technology oriented person, the answers will be different than if you ask a legal kind of entity, and if you ask a different stakeholder who's coming from the policy framework or from the implementation industry framework. And in my opinion, the first thing we should have is a single source of truth into this, like a governance structure that would tell you a trust stack should, and the best kind of guidelines aspect, include these different layers. And to me, the first layer is the ability to allow users to have accessibility to their data, and also visibility of data transactions that exist across the map, and authenticating who actually access those data transactions at different layer of the mapping. And this is something that we had in conversation and research communities, and as well industrial communities, since 2009, because we had this massive technological crisis where user woke up one day and realized that they want to have acquisition of their own, as you have said, and also our colleague from Greece just highlighted. Accessibility to data and accessibility to data market is considered today an economy by itself. The work we're seeing around the DPIs and the government technologies, which is the new rise of technologies that we are gonna see until 2030, is gonna be massing to over 6 trillion USDs. So it's a huge industry that's being developed on the back of the data that's being provided by the citizens. So how can we make sure that the first layer of providing accessibility to those data in a secure manner is available for the users? The second layer is about the security stack, and this is what we already have, and I think we've done quite a rigorous work around it. We just have to perfect the adaptability of those security stack onto different platforms, especially if we're talking about the metaverse, or if we're talking about this kind of real-time transactions, then we need to make sure that they are, I would say, fast enough. They are as well light in operations to be able to be computed into different devices as well. And the third layer is the layer of legislation and regulation, because I don't know, I mean, it takes, we have discussed this several times across the map, but I think I just want to reiterate this for people who don't understand that legislation takes time. Legislation takes, I mean, a cycle of 3 years or a cycle of more than 3 years in certain jurisdictions to take an effect. And technology development is not waiting for legislation to be passed. We see new models of AI being deployed and pushed across markets. So how can we protect users through legislations if we can produce maybe something that's faster than what we're having in the current cycle? Is very important.
I want to come back to a couple of your points, especially on data. and open source modeling. But I want to, in the interest of time, open this up now to the audience. I want to see if anyone has any questions. We can go ahead and pass the microphone around, and I'm also going to ask that we monitor the chat online to see if there's some questions. But we have a question over here. I can pass you the mic. Please tell us what your name is and where you're from, and please address.
Sure, fantastic. Thank you. My name is Ibrahim, and I'm from the Digital Impact Alliance, DIAL. We work in supporting countries in Africa deal with or develop data governance frameworks, which are in line, up to standard, with global best practices. Now, with that in mind, and Dr. Hoda, I'm looking at you for this question probably. Britain said this legal framework development is a second bite at that apple, which I think is quite exciting. But with countries in Africa, which are latecomers into this digital governance space, and with the advent of fast-paced development of technologies that require consume, ingest, but at the same time produce a whole lot of data, how do you expect countries in Africa, or how do you advise for them to deal with private sector actors at this point in time with 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 enabling legal frameworks, with supportive legal frameworks that are not stifling innovation, but at the same time creating that ability to drive value out of engagement with the private sector?
Ibrahim, right? Ibrahim, right? Thank you so much for the question, I would say. The first thing I would say that Africa is not a latecomer into this conversation because Africa itself have produced the first, I would say, payment infrastructure. Like within DPI infrastructure, you care about payment scales, you care about digital identity, you care about as well accessibility to healthcare services and other type of services on the platform and regulation. And Africa, with examples that happened in Kenya, like the M-Pesa, for example, in the payment structure, were pioneering in this space even globally. So I would say, and I think it's one of the first or two payment global systems that existed. And as well, Rwanda itself at the moment is building loads of good stack when it comes to government tech that is also pioneering on a government level. So I think there is a lot to learn from Africa when it comes to their mass deployment onto those structures. And also when we talked like in 23, we talked to the Minister of Technology and Infrastructure in Rwanda, and they were also trying to pass this knowledge through African countries to African countries from Rwanda, which is great to see. My advice when it comes to developing legislation or regulations for government technologies in general, touching emerging technologies, not just one aspect of technology, is try to embody what we have already seen in the global de facto, which is a sandboxing approach. A sandboxing approach normally is something that we see mostly in financial sectors because in trying to de-risk the threat that might come into the financial space from adapting a new technology or adapting as well a new emerging aspects into the mass deployment of a system. So a sandboxing approach into those technologies between private sector and public sector is quite important. And this is what we have tried to push for with the World Economic Forum in UAE as well. We have established this kind of a global trade regulatory structure where countries are encouraged to come and be onboarded on it to understand how can they deploy specific technologies like AI into different domains, not just in the government, but as well in the public sector as well as industry. So I think learning from those global examples and building your own niche, localized example is quite important for you to understand the current pressing need in your markets and try to keep that kind of indigenous space of solution making and build your own jurisdiction of regulations and policies, because this is something you should not, as Britain said, I do agree on this 100%, you should not copy paste from a global structure. You should try to understand the nonsense and the problems and the challenges that you have in the ground and that you're trying to solve for, because it's part of the sovereignty aspects of technology, sovereignty aspects of data, sovereignty aspects as well of the infrastructure that you will be developing for these type of technologies across the map.
Do we have anyone else in the room with a question? If not, can we pull up maybe the chat from the Zoom room so we can also look at that? Okay, while we wait for that to come in, I wanna. Okay, we've touched on some of these, but I wanna touch on something that came up here in this conversation, and I wanna really there seems to be a tension, right, in most bodies of research and some work about having sovereignty, right, but also making sure that the internet that we develop isn't fragmented. And I want to, and a large part of that is this data economy that you touched on, and a lot of that is this really just global data stewardship, right? I mean, we're talking about tech and we're talking about platforms, whether decentralized or centralized, that really span multiple physical jurisdictions, right? Across countries, across nations, regionally. So I want to come in and I want to open this up. First, I want to direct it to Robin. Um, how is Meta thinking about this data stewardship aspect of this technology, of this future internet? All of these technologies are sort of changing the way users either produce data or interact with data. So yeah, how is Meta thinking about this? And how do you see it maybe changing or affecting, again, building on that user trust?
Thanks. That's such an important question. And I think it applies not only, when you're thinking about the metaverse and AI and things like that, but really to the way that we are interacting with the internet in general. I think we really need to get crisp on what we mean by sovereignty, right? Because there are a lot of different approaches and different definitions to digital sovereignty. For some, it can mean sovereignty of government, and often that, historically has been very territorial in nature and physical in nature. But then with the internet, that sort of shifts all of that. But then there's also the concept of personal sovereignty, digital sovereignty, and so I think one of the most important things to do is make sure that as we are, creating different governance frameworks, we're doing two things. One, making sure that they're interoperable with one another, so that we are not creating frameworks that are not compatible, so that you can't offer services, in two separate jurisdictions at the same time that are more or less the same. And so I think that's sort of one of the key things. Essential to ensuring that is making sure, as I mentioned earlier, we're promoting things that are foundational to an open, interoperable, and secure internet, in particular, the free flow of data across borders, and digital security, and broader adoption of some of the best technologies and tools that we have to augment digital security, like encryption of data in transit and data at rest. The second thing is we need to make sure that governance is adaptable. And that, is a really hard needle to thread. I think we do this in every space of digital governance, the best we can, but we're still really trying to get to good. And the reason for that is because it's really hard to know what the future is going to look like. I think, Britain was absolutely hitting the nail on the head when she was talking about how these laws that we're often applying today, that were created in the 80s, 90s, and early aughts, they don't necessarily seamlessly fit with the technologies of today. So let's take that as a cautionary tale, not only around making sure that we are not just copy pasting and making the mistakes of yesterday, but also making sure that as we're creating legal frameworks, we're built we're building we're building them with, sorry, this keeps going out on me. We're building them with enough flexibility and adaptability, and in a way that in some senses is really technology neutral, even though we're still talking about tech governance, so that in 20, 30 years, we're not in the same position where we have a slower to develop legal framework than technology, is adopted, that really is not fit for purpose. To that end, I think, governance has to be collaborative, cooperative, and multi-stakeholder. One of the most essential things in how we think about not only product and service governance, but also just creating what the policy frameworks and legal frameworks around the world, what we think that they should look like, is making sure that we're collaborating with other private sector peers, not only within our sector, but with other kinds of companies in different sectors as well, collaborating with government, civil society, academia, and users. And I think that's, one of the great examples of why forums like IGF are so critical. It gives us this opportunity to come together and to really promote that kind of multi-stakeholderism. And then I think the last thing is, we have responsible innovation principles. And one of the things that's really important about those principles is we've developed them in a way that is meant to be adaptable in just the same way that I'm sort of suggesting our legal frameworks need to be adaptable. They're high level principles that we have to execute on in a way that users trust. And the way that we know we're doing that right is because users are happy with it. And it's exactly like Britton said, what's good for users is good for human rights. And frankly, what's good for users and human rights is also good for economic development and digital transformation. And so our responsible innovation principles are never surprise people. A good example of that is on our smart glasses, the Meta Ray-Bans. If they're turned on, you can see a little LED light. So people will know if a person in their vicinity is using these glasses to take pictures or to live stream or something like that. And if the user actually tries to cover up the LED, they'll get a prompt that they have to uncover it in order to continue using the product as they want. In addition to that, we want to provide controls that matter. This is especially important as it applies to youth using our products. Not only making sure that youth have those controls and that we're starting with like built-in privacy by default, but also making sure that parents have the kinds of controls that they want, so that they can play a really active role in guiding the experiences of the experiences that their children are having online using these technologies. In addition to that, consider everybody. Consider everybody is our third principle, and it's really meant to ensure accessibility. It's meant to ensure that this is an internet and these are technologies for everybody. An example of how we do that is by making sure that we have adjusted height, for example, on our Meta Horizon operating system, which means that whether you are standing up or sitting down, you can have the same really comfortable experience in VR. Um, we also have a put people first principle. This is all about privacy and security. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not good at holding microphones. You'd think I was a digital native, and so some of this would be easier, but I'm not great with technology. Although I guess this isn't really digital technology. Anyways, put people first, privacy, security. I could go on about that for a very long time. In the context of VR in particular in the metaverse, VR and augmented reality and XR, I think we think a lot first and foremost about the youth experience and making sure that we're building privacy and security into that. But then the other aspect of that is making sure that adults have that same kind of control over their experiences and autonomy. We implement this through a lot of different approaches that range from the kinds of user controls that we've talked about, but also privacy enhancing techniques like processing data on device. And then we also try to minimize data collection as much as we can. And then we do safety and integrity as one of the major things. And I think you'll notice that safety and integrity sort of principles are woven throughout some of our other principles, but it's also its own standalone principle. And we really try to live that and make sure that our users can experience that principle by fostering safe and healthy communities. We want to make sure that we are promoting communities where people can gather with shared intent, incentives, and establish positive norms to connect online. We want to be empowering people, developers, creators, and users with the kinds of tools to create the experiences they want. But we also need to make sure that people with bad intentions are not able to just do whatever they want on services. And so with that in mind, we have a code of conduct for virtual experiences that makes sure that we do things like prohibit illegal, abusive behavior, or excuse me, behavior that promotes illegal activity, behavior that is abusive, or behavior that could actually lead to physical harm. And then, we're also doing things to promote admins and their ability to moderate their spaces. And so we just want to make sure that as we're thinking about these things, those high level values, those principles are really adapted into governance structures that governments are considering so that we can really be maximizing voice, safety, authenticity, dignity, and privacy in the growing adoption of these new technologies.
Thank you, Robin. I think that was very comprehensive. And I want to touch on one thing that I think is really important, right? So when you're developing these frameworks, right, you really do need a whole of society approach. But there's also something interesting here that I think we can all take away, which is there really is an alignment of interest, right? And it's an alignment of interest for everyone because trust makes things work, right? When a user trusts a technology or trusts a platform or a service, that can expand, that can grow. That's an opportunity for growth for everyone. And with that, I want to pass this on to Apostles now. From you're sort of the example of what private public cooperation can do, and it's kind of like the bread and butter that we do at the forum. So I want to ask you, how does Greece approach this, right? This issue of data. How do you approach data stewardship? How do you come up with these frameworks that work, that are trustworthy, that are interoperable, and that leverage all of these sort of new technological innovations so that people can have better access to opportunities through digital intermediaries? And then I'm going to pass on to Britton after that on a similar question, but I'll let Apostles go first. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Judith. Fantastic question. I think in the Greek context, trust, privacy, and data security are defining axioms and characteristics of the digital transformation strategy. Um, Everything that was done and is still being done has always put users first, citizens first, their data, and everything happens with consent. So my colleagues here mentioned a bunch of great words earlier. Transparency, consent is important. So anything, anytime a digital service, whether that's commenced by the citizen or by another government organization, has to access data, the citizen has to consent to that data processing. Other than that, from an institutional perspective, when the Ministry of Digital Governance was created, the minister, it was designed that he was endowed with CIO roles, let's say. That means or they had the unilateral power to connect any data set they want. But I think connect is the operative keyword here because it's not about owning the data sets. It's not about owning the data. It's about simply connecting different registries with the intent of producing a digital service outcome for the citizen, and the citizen has explicitly asked for that. So it's not about the government going out there on its own and processing data and creating new registries and creating stuff like that. But it's about creating the experience and creating the trust culture that people know, oh, I want to do X, Y, Z. Here's how I do it. Here's one platform to do it, and it's being done in a transparent way to me and to my understanding. Um, so trust, openness, trustworthiness are defining characteristics of the digital transformation strategy.
This is good. Okay, good. Thank you so much. When we talk about traditional digital public infrastructure, the things that kind of come up really always are, data exchange, online payment systems, and digital identity. And so, across the stage, we see how people approach that in different ways, right? Whether you're building soft digital identities and footprints through like a Meta account or your Google account or whatever it is, but these all sort of build on this aspect of connection. And I want to pass on to you now, Britton. What do you think are those gaps really? Because we're talking about theoretically, and we see this alignment, right? This is a good alignment of incentives, but what do you think is the gap there then to take us there? And then you can talk about it from a regulatory standpoint, but what do you think are the gaps there to make sure that we sort of all align and take this work forward?
3 things. Number 1, I think if we are not deliberate about creating spaces for cultural engagement and education in the next iteration of the internet, we will not have them in the same way that we did in the first. When you look at the people who created the internet, um, the first time, they all were professors who were trying to share information. They really privileged, they worked for government organizations. They got their funding from government organizations. With the next iteration having extensive private investment into it, it is not a natural evolution to have a cultural space emerge if civil society does not ask for it and if governments aren't aware that that is a gap. You can look at this with the metaverse where you saw certain countries starting to create cultural properties. Barbados created an embassy in the metaverse. South Korea had a widespread presence. And if you look at Saudi Arabia, there's actually augmented reality aspects of their cultural tours when you go to some of their UNESCO World Heritage sites. So you have to think about how the things that make people unique, the things that your people value, the things that make you special translate into the new mediums of computing. Second is you have to think about hardware floor, because the hardware floor for some of these new technologies is not solidified yet. What this means is that we risk creating fragmentation via technical means when we may not intend for that to happen. The example for that is Magic Leap just announced that they are going to stop supporting their first edition of their XR headset. And so all of the content that was created for the last 8 years will no longer be accessible in a matter of weeks. This is happening again and again and again, and there are many sort of industry groups and user groups within the XR community who are very, very concerned about the loss of their data, the loss of their creative energy, because the hardware floor is not settled. We don't know the format. There are groups working on that now that are just starting to emerge, like the Metaverse Standards Forum. Most people are very surprised to learn that it was just this year that the file format for 3D assets to actually move between worlds and function between worlds was created by Adobe. So the equivalent of a PDF type format for digital assets. We're really at that phase in some of these new computing platforms. And so you have to think about what that means and what will be lost if we don't bring it along. I think the final piece is looking at ways that concepts like consent can be evolved with new computing platforms. I did a study that was published and presented at ISMAR, which is a big conference about spatial computing. Kind of strange for an international law professor to be there, but we were looking at different ways that the notice and consent mechanisms that you have in flat screen traditional computing could be adapted to 3D computing, and if the affordances of 3D technology meant you could do it differently. And we found that yes, you could do it differently. Users liked the mechanism that we built that showed them that their eyes were being tracked and how the eye tracking was working. They responded really, really positively to that. And then they felt like they were able to consent to the use of their data in more meaningfully informed ways. That's kind of anathema to what a lot of companies thought, that if you showed people that their eyes were being tracked, it might freak them out, to be honest. But they liked understanding what the data flows, we visualized the data flows for them and explained to them how the device worked. That was the basis for meaningfully informed consent that you couldn't do on a flat screen. You had to do it in 3D. So I think those are the three pieces that might get overlooked if we're just looking at it through a pure kind of platform policy or regulatory lens.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And we have now the warning 3-minute mark, but I want to wrap up. And I think there's some good takeaways to this, right? First, I think when we think about the future internet, all of us are active participants in how we build that future together, right? None of us are like passive users of the internet or online or digital intermediaries. We all have an active role in how we shape that. And I want us all to feel empowered and walk away in knowing that what we do matters, right? From a user standpoint or through your own personal capacities in whatever way you join us. I see Jeff from Amazon Web Services here, and we'll chat in a bit with him. But the second takeaway is, regardless of what the future internet looks like, right? we have to make sure that we're taking a principled approach to how we build this, right? We want to make sure that the user is at the center, that digital public infrastructure really is a means to further, whether it's economic opportunity or connectivity, whether it's metaverse, whether it's projects like the ones that Britton mentioned, and there's also there's the Duaverse now, which is like the Dubai Electricity and Water Association created this like.
I mean, in UAE, we have many. We have as well the one with MR and the Land Authority, where you can pay and actually co-pay for real estate assets on this in the spot. We have as well developed a strategy that is extremely applicable to wide scale of industries, and we are encouraging the industry to build that kind of metaverse collaborative space that reflects back into the economy and different FDI structures. So I think it is about how the leadership of this space will happen. I mean, we have advocacy on across the map from the leaders of the country, which translate to building economies and building companies and building a solution that translates across map.
But this is exactly what we talk about, right? So we in these examples see how metaverse or AI is being built into DPI, right? This is really pushing forth how people are going to experience the future of the internet. And I think lastly, right, all of our incentives align. No one advocates, no one wants like a bad future internet. So it's important to all come together. And I want to thank, to close up, I want to thank the IGF for hosting us and allowing us to have this space. I want to thank all of you for being wonderful supporters of our work, but also really great collaborators in what we do. And, the final takeaway is this is kind of the example of what we want moving forward, right? This is all of society represented on this panel and through the work that we've been doing here for the last couple of days. So I encourage you to take that with you and be active participants in the future internet that we want to create, right? It's not static. It's a product that keeps evolving, and we keep evolving with it. So again, thank you so much. I'll let all of us go. Again, thank you for spending the last day of the forum with us. We're super grateful. And if you have questions and you want to hang around, please do so. We'll be here for a couple more minutes. Thank you. Round of applause for our wonderful panelists. Thank you.